want to take some notes with you today about labor unions, labor relations, and collective bargaining because they are definitely uh, important in FES organizations. Many professions in the public sector are unionized and collectively bargain, including your profession. So let's first talk about some basics about labor unions. So labor unions are an association of workers that are formed to protect and further their rights and interests. So uh, one of the more negative views of labor unions is that they protect bad workers, and certainly there are cases where uh, you know maybe people in the workforce don't feel like the workers should be protected for whatever they did. But it's important to remember that labor unions aren't they don't exist to be a moral compass. They exist to defend the contract. So they protect their rights and interests, and they defend the contract. So it's not necessarily that the labor union representatives or the group of workers believes that the worker is always right, but instead that there should be a process for discipline, that management should be going by the contract, that these things are negotiated for a reason, and if they aren't followed, then um, uh, uh, there's a lack of trust between administration and labor. So it's important. It's important to know that labor unions are an association of workers. They protect their rights and interests. That's what they're formed to do, and they defend the contract. If you Google what labor unions do, you'll mostly get like economic research and the effects of labor unions broadly. Um, but I want to talk a little bit about labor union activities, some basic labor union activities. So, so labor unions first and foremost organize their members. Labor unions spend a lot of time trying to grow their membership, trying to reach out to their membership, especially following the Supreme Court ruling of Janus v. AFSCME, where the automatic deduction of dues is now unconstitutional. It's extremely important for labor unions like the IAFF to reach out to their members and make sure that they're recruiting and they're making it clear to their members what kind of services they are providing. Um, One of the other things, so besides organizing and outreach and possibly, hey, write your, they'll ask their members to write their member of Congress or their member of the state legislature, or participate in different activities that would defend their rights and protect legislation that benefits them in their profession. So that's part of lobbying. So they'll ask members to participate in lobbying, or they also have their own lobbyists. So labor unions have their own lobbyists that go and provide information to congressmen and women. And what they're most well known for, labor unions, is strikes. Now, strikes are interesting because strikes are really they're they're actually what happens when the collective bargaining process kind of breaks down. So originally, um, when teachers and firefighters and police officers and other public employees got the right to strike, I'm sorry, the right to organize. Not They don't all have the right to strike. The right to organize uh, as labor unions and with collective bargaining rights. It was originally done with Democratic and Republican support because it thought it would limit strikes. It thought, well, this will actually keep strikes from happening, because if you give um, employees a right to bargain at the table for their working conditions and their wages, they won't find the need to strike. So, uh, anyway, labor unions have a reputation for if you have labor unions, you're going to get strikes. Um, but a lot of those strikes also happen in places where they don't have collective bargaining rights, where they don't negotiate contracts. Look at in 2018, the teacher strikes in West Virginia. Teachers went on strike all across the state. They don't have any bargaining rights, so they have to use their power to strike. Now, when it comes to public safety forces like FES organizations and police officers, you don't usually have the right to strike. Most states, the vast majority of states, don't give police officers and firefighters the right to strike. But that doesn't mean that they don't have activities that are similar to striking that they can participate in. So that would involve slowdowns. Um, Slowdowns are a little less common, would be a little less common in public service, because you're not making widgets or automobiles or anything like that. So slowdowns are a little less relevant, but sick outs. So you can organize a sick out that would not be a strike, but everybody can call in sick, and whatever the contract allows without a doctor's note. You can if you're out for more than 3 days, maybe you need a doctor's note of some type, or there are different things you have to provide, some kind of documentation of your illness. Well, everybody can call in sick on a day without any kind of punishment, and it's not a strike, but it is a organized activity by the labor union. And then there's the more extreme is the wildcat strike. And the wildcat strike is actually a strike from the workers that's not authorized by the union. So the union the union didn't take a strike vote. They didn't authorize this strike, and maybe it's even illegal, but the workers decide to go on strike anyway. So organizing their members, lobbying, representing their members in legal cases in some circumstances, providing representation when a worker feels that they've been unfairly treated unfairly, and then of course, like strikes and those more extreme actions that are actually relatively rare in a lot of public service sectors. Those are some union activities. The one I want to dive into in more detail is collective bargaining. And collective bargaining, we're going to talk about the steps, because either as part of union representation, as a union representative in the position you're currently in, or possibly in administration, depending on your supervisor role, you're sometimes a member of the union, you're sometimes not a member of the union. You might end up on a negotiating team, either for administration or for labor, and so it might be good to know, if you don't already, know some of the basic steps of collective bargaining. Okay, so step one in the negotiation process or the collective bargaining process is to uh, establish a negotiation team. So you need to establish a negotiating team, a group of individuals, either depending on your position in administration or within the labor union. Establish a negotiating team that is going to represent your side. Step two is analyze. That should be a Z. Analyze the current agreement, if there is one. So after you've got a team together, you analyze the current agreement, and this means that you look at what the experiences have been under the current collective bargaining agreement that's about to expire. So if you have one, if you don't have a current agreement and it's a newly organized union and administration hasn't in the past negotiated with the workers, then you have to start from scratch, which is an extremely long process. But let's assume that you have a collective bargaining agreement that is expiring and you need to negotiate a new one. Well, the when you analyze your experience under the new one, you're going to analyze the wages, the benefits data, look at what was your experience under the current agreement, what worked and what didn't, because throughout the 3-year contract or 4-year contract or whatever it is, there are going to be issues that come up, and there are going to be grievances filed, and there's going to be misunderstandings between administration and the workers about what things in the contract mean. So you're going to need to figure out like what kind of language can we clarify, what kind of things aren't in the contract that we need to put in the contract. This is something that both sides do. The administration decides, okay, look, we had this issue earlier in the year with one employee. We didn't have anything that addressed this issue in the contract. We need to put something in the contract that addresses that issue. Or maybe something in the contract is outdated. Technology has made something, some process that's in the agreement not make any sense, so that needs to be fixed. And so both sides are going to analyze the current agreement and what has worked and what hasn't worked, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if it needs to be addressed, it can be improved in the new contract. So the other thing they're going to do is analyze wages, benefits data, things like that. And compare to similar jurisdictions and occupational groups. So the administration will look at what other FES organizations are paying, what kind of benefits are being provided in jurisdictions that are similar in size, and they're going to see, are we overpaying our workers, are we underpaying our workers, what kind of raises are other jurisdictions getting. The labor union is going to do the same thing, trying to negotiate better benefits and better wages by looking at jurisdictions that are similar that might have better increases, and so both groups are going to compare this data across jurisdictions. They also need to analyze at that time. They're going to be analyzing any legal changes. Excuse me here. So they're going to analyze any legal changes. This would be like the Supreme Court case Janus v. Asked Me, where the Supreme Court rules that The automatic deduction of agency fees is unconstitutional, um, and so that can't be in the contract. The automatic deduction of the cost of collective bargaining then has to be taken out of the contract because there's been a legal change. So if there's state law that prohibits certain things from being negotiated, then that needs to be addressed. If a Supreme Court case affects what can be negotiated and what can't be negotiated, then that needs to be addressed. Clearly, you can't have anything in your collective bargaining agreement that's illegal. So you need to look at the legal changes. And again, administration and labor will do that. Then, after you've analyzed the current agreement and analyzed the wages and benefits of other jurisdictions and the legal changes since the last negotiated contract, then you need to discuss your priorities. Figure out what your priorities are, and prepare justifications for them. So each side is going to then say, okay, here's our biggest problems with the current contract, and here's what we can't do in the future, or here's what we can do in the future. We need to figure out what our priorities are, and then prepare to justify them. So if the priority for labor is health insurance and contributions to health insurance, they're going to need to make sure they can justify keeping their contributions to health insurance low, and by comparing to other districts, or whatever justification they can use. If management or administration decides that larger health insurance contributions is important, but also keeping a pay increase lower is important, then they're going to want to be able to justify lower pay increases and greater contributions to health insurance. Labor might also have issues with safety equipment or staffing levels, or a number of any other things that they might decide are part of their priorities. So both sides have to figure out what are our priorities and how are we going to justify. Then both sides need to get together and create a schedule. So arrange a schedule for when things are going to happen. So you need to schedule, basically this is kind of called meet and confer. So when are you going to meet within reasonable times, confer about the work conditions and when are formal presentations going to be made and written proposals going to be turned in. Kind of create a timeline, a schedule for the negotiation, an agreed upon schedule. After the schedule is agreed upon, both sides are going to make formal presentations and provide written proposals with their demands. So they're going to formally present their proposals. This involves explaining those priorities, their proposals for their contract, the details of what they would like to see done. Now, if you know anything about negotiations, you don't usually start at the place that you plan on finishing. So usually formal presentations and the initial contract, the initial agreement proposed by each side are extreme. Labor is going to present a very labor-friendly proposal. Administration is going to present a very administration-friendly proposal, and then they're going to start negotiations from those two extremes, working to get closer on things. They need to then set an agenda for what will be discussed first. So set agenda. So when they set an agenda, they decide, which things are we going to discuss first, which things are we going to wait until later in negotiations. They, there's a couple of different ways that administration and labor can work this out. They can either agree to discuss like the foundational nuts and bolts things in agreements. They can take on wages very early in the process. They can decide to discuss first. We're going to discuss the things that both sides agree on. The things that work in the contract, both sides are happy with these items, with how it was in the last contract, or they agree on these ways of changing certain items in the contract. So you might start with the easy things. Okay, here's some things we can knock out real quick. We both agree on this. We both agree on that. We're not going to change this. And then they put the harder things toward the back. Or you can try to take on the more difficult things first and leave the harder thing, and leave the easier things for later. Then once you figure out what is going to be on the agenda and what order things are going to be taken in, then you need to actually conduct negotiations. All right, that's an N. You need to actually conduct negotiations. So this is when you actually carry out like this for that. Okay, we want this, you want that. How can we compromise? Where can we find agreement? If both sides and their representatives can work something out, then this can be sometimes smoother than not. Sometimes if there's too much disagreement between the two sides, they can bring in a mediator, and then the mediator is an impartial third party that tries to find agreement and tries to get both sides talking and negotiating. Different states have different mediator rules, but a mediator can be brought in to help the two sides figure out an agreement. If things get particularly ugly, things can go to arbitration, and then an arbitrator is going to side with one side or the other. This can be, depending on state laws, binding. So binding arbitration is a very powerful thing, and it's a very powerful incentive for both sides to come to an agreement, because if something goes to binding arbitration and you have two final best offers from each side and they're at a stalemate, then the arbitrator is most likely going to pick one side's agreement over the other, and that terrifies both sides a lot of times into coming to some kind of agreement, because they don't want to see the arbitrator pick the other side's final best offer, because that's going to favor that side over theirs. So there's a this for that negotiation that happens, and hopefully it doesn't go to arbitration. Sometimes a mediator is brought in. When it's all said and done, they have to draft a final agreement. Vote and sign. So at the end of the process, they draft the final agreement. The administration or city council or state legislature, depending on the level of profession that we're, level of service, public service that we're talking about, will have to vote in favor of the contract and approve the contract. The labor union members, the workers themselves, will have to vote on the contract that's been brought back to them by the representatives, and then it'll have to be signed by representatives on both sides. Then of course, over the next how many ever years, the terms of the agreement will have to be carried out. So labor has to live up to their side of the agreement, and management or administration has to live up to their side of the agreement. And then you start this whole process over again, where you get to the end of the contract, and you establish a negotiation team, you analyze the current agreement, the analyze the wages and benefits, the legal conditions, how the legal conditions have changed, create a set of priorities, schedule meetings, formally present proposals, set an agenda for negotiations, actually conduct negotiations, and then draft an agreement again. When it comes to it being an administrator, there's positives and negatives to being in a labor union environment, of course. So if you've gotten into administration, public administrators will tell me a couple of different things when I talk to them about these issues. If a lot of times administrators in non-union environments like the discretion that gives them, because they can make a lot of administrative decisions without having to worry about grievances or any kind of complaints from their workers, or the labor union at least. And it gives them a lot of administrative discretion. And for public administrators, that makes sense. Administrators want to be able to make administrative decisions. That's their job. On the other hand, a lot of administrators in labor union environments aren't always happy with the labor union. They're not always happy with the agreement. They're not always happy with some of the things in the agreement, which is why you then go through a negotiation process and try and change those things if possible, if something's not working. But one of the nice things being an administrator in a labor union environment with a contract is that it does give the administrator a lot of guidance. That when it comes to making a decision, the administrator can figure out what was negotiated, what process is supposed to be followed, and then follow that process. And things aren't so up in the air when it comes to wages, benefits, those kind of things. Those have been negotiated. They're decided. When you hire a new employee, you can say, look, you're going to get here's the collective bargaining agreement over the next 3 years. You're going to get a 2% raise each year, or 1% raise each year, or whatever's been negotiated. And so you don't deal a lot with like workers coming to you demanding raises because it's negotiated. You get the raise that's been negotiated for you by the labor union. So there's positives and negatives to being an administrator in a collective bargaining environment. The clarity and the guidance that the agreement gives and the negotiation that happens can actually be kind of nice for administrators. But on the other hand, it does, when you negotiate with the workers, certain working conditions and procedures and these kind of rules, then it does take some of the power away from the administrator to make certain decisions about personnel, and that's part of the administrator's job. So yeah, it constrains a little bit, but it also provides some clarity. All right, thank you.